Attendees at the conference, distinguished guests, and all people who have lived experience of mental health conditions, thank you for inviting me to speak to you. Today I would like to tell two narratives. The first is the narrative of my mental health around psychosis, and the second is the narrative of my PhD, Schizophrenia and the Self, Rebuilding and Maintaining Identity After a Diagnosis of Schizophrenia. I was diagnosed with schizophrenia in the summer of 2003. In the period leading up to the diagnosis, I experienced a number of psychotic symptoms. I experienced thought insertion with thoughts such as Matthew is the devil, Matthew being a very good friend of mine. Another thought was kill Bob Dylan. I love the music of Bob Dylan. I love the music of Bob Dylan. I imagined a voice that assailed me, telling me that I was going mad. Although I do not remember it, a friend who knew me at the time says I also heard the voice telling me to suicide. I experienced delusions of reference, where pictures or words or images that related to what I was going through seemed to jump out at me. I remember seeing my partner's face, but mutilated. I felt like my mind was a small island surrounded by irrationality. I felt like my grip on reality was tenuous. I did not feel I could guarantee that I would not hurt myself or someone else. I remember sitting in St. Mary's Cathedral, a calming, uplifting space, and crying at the thoughts going through my head. Luckily enough, I had insight into the symptoms of my psychosis and, I believe, experienced intervention relatively early during the psychosis. Issues came to a head when my mum came home and found me crying in my bedroom. Mum immediately booked me in to see a GP. I still see the same GP now. She was very gentle and took down my story. She said to me, take this drug, risperidone, but don't look up what it's used for, and come back to me tomorrow. Of course, that night my mum looked it up. The internet said used to treat schizophrenia. When she told me initially, I went into shock. I went to my room and looked up non-pharmacological treatments for schizophrenia. I came back downstairs and wailed and wailed and wailed with my parents. I asked my parents, why did Ormi and Orpi, my grandparents, survive the Holocaust, only for me to experience this illness? Now, this question may not make sense rationally, but it made sense emotionally. At this point, I wish to introduce the narrative of my PhD. I had been medicated for schizophrenia with clozapine and stabilized. Luckily, clozapine squashed all my psychotic symptoms. I'd finished a degree in arts law, an exchange at New York University, and a Master's of Arts in journalism. I was sitting in the garden with my parents and I asked my dad, do you think I could write a PhD? And he said yes. At this point, I knew at the beginning of the PhD that I did not want to write on a minor issue. I wanted to write about something of importance to me and to society more broadly. As a consumer advocate by that stage, it was natural that I wished to write about schizophrenia and tie this to my love of sociology. So I began reading on the sociology of schizophrenia. The issue of identity emerged as I thought about what I was reading. However, I needed an intellectual framework for my research into identity. I found this with the theory of symbolic interactionism, particularly the work of George Mead and Bloomer. don't know his name. I've forgotten it. It's popped out of my head. Briefly, symbolic interactionism holds that identity emerges through a process of interacting with other people in the medium of symbols, language, and meaning. Importantly, this interaction includes taking the point of view of the other. That is to say, we come to understand and anticipate how others will see us. I also looked to the theory of phenomenology, an approach to understanding the experience of consciousness directly developed through the work of Husserl and Heidegger. My reading suggested to me that schizophrenia could be more than just an illness. It could cause a break with your identity, your biography. This threat could be so serious as to be described as ontological, that it could threaten the very existence of identity. I use the term biographical crisis. Through the Australian Schizophrenia Research Bank, I got in contact with 12 people who were interested to be interviewed for the thesis. Ages ranged from early 20s to mid 50s and included men and women, people with family, and people alone. Sadly, a lot of them were alone. Being a qualitative thesis, certain themes emerged fairly organically. Sorry. Being a qualitative thesis, certain themes emerged fairly organically out of my interviews. I found that people engaged in a number of processes that helped me reconnect with their sense of identity, helped face what was an ontological threat. These processes included 6 areas of interaction, some of which may have been present in each case. The first was the development of illness narratives, stories that helped people diagnosed with schizophrenia make sense out of the experience they had had. Typically, this included a narrative around proximate causes of the illness, symptoms and symptom relief, and ongoing monitoring. The second was interaction with family and friends. These interactions can generally be described as everyday or ordinary, but from a symbolic interactionist point of view, these kinds of repeated everyday interactions are very important to identity building. The third was illness management. This included things as prosaic as sourcing medication to things as important as monitoring symptoms for relapse. It may also include hiding signs of stigmatized illness. The fourth, life management, included a wide range of behaviors of a practical nature like education, employment, and developing relationships with people. The setting of life goals was the fifth factor that emerged. In light of what we may call a recovery-oriented approach, and apologies for using the term recovery. Thank you. We may look back on goal setting as a vital element, not only in rebuilding identity, but in recovery more generally. The final factor was, in some cases, participation in organized religion. This appeared to give people diagnosed with schizophrenia a cogent moral structure and regular social interaction. All these factors help people rebuild their sense of self, their self-projection, their ability to communicate and interact. And this identity was typically maintained through a process of what is known as stigma concealment or passing. Stigma concealment involves hiding signs of the stigmatized condition and passing for normal. At this point, I would like to interrupt the narrative of my PhD. I almost said the narrative of my NEHD. And and make an observation about my illness. I realized, writing about how people rebuilt their sense of identity, that in part I was writing about myself. I myself had gone through a biographical crisis. This was reflected in the text of the PhD. Originally, I had only one comment in the document, 80,000 word document. I had only one comment about drawing on lived experience to write the thesis. My secondary supervisors suggested that I either thematize the issue as an academic with a relevant mental health condition or not comment on it at all. I decided to thematize it. This marked the point I began to think of myself not only as a consumer advocate, but as a consumer academic. I realized that many of the processes I was describing, I had actually gone through myself. In particular, ongoing interaction with a loving and supportive family had helped me deal with a floundering sense of who I was. Was I just another schizophrenic? Or was I something more? Engaging in paid employment also did a great deal for my sense of self-worth and identity. And I don't know if any of them are here, but Justin Scanlon, Nick Hancock, and Anne Honey all provided early employment for me as a researcher. And I would like to acknowledge that. Likewise, buying a car increased my confidence and independence. Back to the PhD. I had developed my analysis of interviews in light of themes found in the literature I had read. I engaged with a number of ideas, and from my work contributed or suggested theoretical development that could contribute to the sociology of mental health conditions. These suggestions include proposals to revise the perspectives of symbolic interactionism and phenomenology to better understand the emotive and embodied nature of identity processes in rebuilding from schizophrenia. Beyond this, the thesis explored the relationship between language, power, and agency, and its significance in shaping the experience of the patient diagnosed with schizophrenia. And I would make an observation here again about recovery, that this relationship between power, language, and agency is probably a defining feature of psychiatric intervention and psychiatric treatment. I would like to finish my talk today with another observation about the illness I have been diagnosed with. Completing the PhD, having those letters after my name, did great things for my confidence and rebuilding my identity after biographical crisis. I was not only a consumer advocate, I was also a consumer academic. And completing the PhD could not have been done without the intellectual support and personal support of the people around me. I know I've got a bit of time, so I'll tell you a bit of a story. I kept a picture on my desk of Gough Whitlam pouring sand through his hand into the hand of Vincent Lingiari. And when I felt that the PhD was too much, I would think back to what Gough did, reshaping the Labour Party, creating a huge agenda, and winning an election after, I think, 18 years of coalition government. And every time I thought, gosh, my PhD is hard, I thought, well, Gough did some pretty hard stuff too. So the support of people around me, social support is my Gough, I suppose you would say. Social support has helped me reach the ongoing goal of self-development. Perhaps We may even conclude that social supports are vital, in addition to medication, for the successful recovery of people diagnosed with psychosis or schizophrenia. Thank you.